When it comes to cutting the budget, where do you stand? Most conservatives would say the budget needs to be cut, and they are hoping for a knight in shining armor to lead the charge. But when it comes to cutting in particular areas, some conservatives would rather see their knight riding a turtle rather than a fast steed to the budget battle. Cut the other guy's programs, but don't cut mine. We will never see a reduction in the budget until we get back to economic and constitutional fundamentals. Fundamentals that are founded on liberty and personal responsibility, even if it hurts to follow them. I'm Gary DeMar, president of American Vision. Oftentimes, because of my work in the area of God and government, a series of books that I wrote in the 1980s, I often get asked to speak at meetings where lots of people want to discuss the issue of politics. And generally, a lot of these meetings I go to, most of the people there are conservatives. There might be a few moderates, maybe a libertarian here or there. And I'm sure to upset people because of some of my views. I upset libertarians because I believe abortion is wrong. I also believe that the state should, in fact, not define marriage, but should protect the definition of marriage as it is found in Scripture. Ultimately, there is always going to be some standard. Evolutionary principles and evolutionary philosophy could never account for the very idea of marriage. So libertarians need some standard outside of themselves and outside of culture in order to make the case for their moral ethic. And they really don't have one if it's based on evolutionary principles. Moderates, on the other hand, can go either way on these basic issues and generally are upset with me when I start talking to things about religion or America's Christian history or the biblical principles of government. So the majority of my audience is generally conservative. And so when I go to a talk like I did this past weekend to speak on what can be done in the crisis that we have today, I offered some very particular solutions to our problems. Solutions that we can take on now. We don't have to wait for some politician to do it. One of the principles that I outline in the God and Government series is that government isn't synonymous with politics. When people hear the word government, they think politics. If you're going to change government, you need to change politicians. But in biblical terms, government is first God's government over all things, and second, various governments related to self-government under God, family government, church government, and civil government. And the realm of civil government is very decentralized. And these are principles I think most conservatives understand. So now I come along and I kind of upset the apple cart this past weekend because when I went to the budget, I said, in most cases you'll find that most Americans will say, let's cut the budget, especially from the conservative side. The budget needs to be cut. These programs need to be cut. But when you get down to particulars, people are a little reluctant to cut everything in the budget because there are lots of things in the budget that help them out. And so politicians are always asked, so what are you going to cut in the budget? Well, they say, well, they're not going to cut Medicare, they can't cut Social Security, they can't cut education, they can't cut the military. Pretty soon there's not a whole lot left to cut in the budget. And so I get up there and I start talking about these various programs that need to be cut. You talk about Social Security, people really get upset because they believe, well, I've paid into this system so long that I should get my money back. And there is a little bit of truth in that. But keep in mind that the employer is paying an equal amount of the employee's amount of Social Security. And so you're really getting a subsidy from your employer. If you're paying 6.12%, if that's the percentage, your employer is also paying that an equal amount. And it's the same with Medicare as well. And you're paying that up to, say, $105,000 or $110,000 a year. He's paying the same. So you're getting a subsidy from your employer in paying Social Security. And so we could cut back Social Security and say employers shouldn't have to pay it. They're not obligated to take care of your retirement. If you want to take care of your retirement, you should do that yourself. The benefits that come to you, well, generally they were promised to you quite a long time ago. They've been added to over the years. So there are lots of things we could do in the area of Social Security because the system itself, while not bankrupt yet, will one day be bankrupt. The amount of the number of people paying into Social Security for the number of people receiving has gone from 30 to 1 down to about 3 or 4 to 1. That can't last over a long period of time, especially since we've seen a birth dearth in the United States. The only thing keeping America's population up is immigration. But one of the areas in which I get a great deal of grief is education. Most people would say, let's cut the Department of Education. Because essentially what's happening with the Department of Education is that money is taken from the states, sent up to Washington in the Department of Education, and then sent back down to the states. We don't need a federal Department of Education. Let the states handle the educational issue themselves. And let those states tax the way they want to tax on it. But I go even further with this. And I said what we should be doing, because we have the freedom to do so, is we shouldn't be going to the state, whether at the federal level or at the local level, to use coercion to take money from property owners to pay for someone else's children's education. My children never went to a public school, which in fact they are government schools. So not only did I have to pay the property tax and general taxes for someone else's education, but I had to pay the tuition for my own children's education. I was being taxed in a double fashion. Well, one particular lady in the audience got upset with me because her argument was, well, how are you going to take care of these children that have learning disabilities? They may have some sort of physical problems. Some of them may have some issues related to Down syndrome and so forth. And I really held back because I didn't want to, come across as a mean guy in all this. And so here are a couple of principles that I laid out. The first thing is you can't change everything overnight. And the second principle is you can't change just one thing. But where you can make a change in your own personal responsibility, then that circle of responsibility is for you to make the change. Yes, there are those who who don't fit the norm in terms of education, but there's a small number of those people. So am I obligated to send my child to a public school because other children don't have a place to go? I'm not obligated to do that. If everybody pulled their children out of the government schools and paid for their children's own education, there would only be a small number of people left over to be trained, and that could take place in the private sector, like it does with so many other institutions. I shouldn't be obligated. 98% of parents shouldn't be obligated to pay for a system in order to take care of 2% of the population. Well, she did not like that answer at all. And so she said, my daughter teaches in the public school. And this is another one of those self-interest issues. Well, my daughter works for the government. To cut that institution would mean my daughter wouldn't have a place in the public school system anymore. That shouldn't be an issue. That was the choice that she made. It's an industry that I believe is unconstitutional and unbiblical. The state should not be educating our children. The state should not be taking from property owners money to pay for the education of children who are really getting education at a discount. There are many, many people now. My children are out of school. I'm still paying property taxes. I paid it while my children were in the private sector education. I'm still paying it. Why should I be subsidizing someone else's education? So when you go to people and you start saying, let's cut the budget, they are all in favor of that, but they don't want to cut this subsidy in the budget that affects me personally. We don't want to cut this particular subsidy because it affects me personally. They want to cut someone else's subsidy. This also comes into view when you start thinking about education. You'll hear parents say, well, our school is different, and so therefore we wouldn't want to cut the subsidies to our schools because they're different. Then you have another group of parents who'll say, well, our school is different. And what both groups are saying is, our school is good, your school is bad. But when you got people on both ends of the spectrum saying that, they're each saying, your school is bad. This guy is saying, your school is bad. This person is saying, my school is good. This guy is saying, my school is good. If that's the case, we have a huge dilemma here. But it isn't the case whether a school is good or bad. The question comes down to who's responsible for educating and paying for the education of your children. You are. I'm not responsible. You are responsible. Now, I mentioned that the second point in all of this was you can't change just one thing. One of the reasons why education is so expensive in our culture today is because of the taxes that we have to pay in order to subsidize all of these things. And so it's going to hurt for a while for us to make the choice to educate our own children. That is the basis of liberty and responsibility. We will see a change in our culture when true conservatives take the burden of responsibility, take the burden of paying for all of this by taking our children out of the government schools and educating and paying for them ourselves. Yes, it will hurt. There may be some things that we're going to have to give up in order to do that, like my wife and I did for many, many years. I worked as a second job. My wife taught in school in order to help pay for the education of our children. We ran our cars longer than probably necessary to do so. We didn't take vacations and so forth. You pay the price for this. But you're paying the price for liberty and responsibility. So the next time someone comes to you and said, what would you cut in the budget? Give them particulars. And one of the areas in which I believe you and I should make the first cut is to get our children out of the government schools and pay for those children, pay for the education of our children ourselves, either in homeschooling or a church school. I had mentioned to them that most churches are vacant 6 days a week. They're only used a few hours a week, and yet there are classrooms because of Sunday school classes. We already have an institution that could take up the slack in the counties in which we live, and that education could be, in essence, paid for because the church has already been paid for through the tithe. So let's cut the budget, not just in general terms, but let's cut the budget in particulars as well.